All right. Sorry, y'all, that cut me off. But that might actually be a good thing in terms of how this is going to upload. So hopefully these don't take too long to upload. Okay, so picking up where we left off with the nominal GDP, we had said that the 2019 GDP was about 21, 22 trillion dollars is what it was estimated at. Now, what I was saying is that this is going to seem significantly higher than the nominal GDP, say, in the year 2000. Okay, so 20 years ago. If you look at the nominal GDP for that year, you'll see it at 10 or 11 trillion dollars. So that sounds crazy, right? Did our GDP double in 20 years? Went from 10 to 11 trillion to 21, 22 trillion, more than double? No, of course not. Um, that's because of inflation. Okay, so that's why when we look at the GDP and how it's measured, we're not wanting to look at the nominal GDP. We're wanting to look at the real GDP. Now, the real GDP is it's how much are your products worth if the prices don't change, if the prices remain constant, remain the same. So it's not that the value of goods was significantly higher now, right, than it was. It's just that inflation occurred, right? Inflation was a lot less. So that's why it's really important to take a look when you're looking at the GDP and you're comparing the GDP. You want to look at the real GDP rather than the nominal GDP. Um, so the way that we can tell if a nation has experienced economic growth is going to be looking at the percentage change of the real GDP over time. So why does this matter? How does this affect you guys? Well, when the GDP is higher and when the percentage of change is greater over a period of time, then there are more job opportunities, then more industries open up, then more technologies are created, right? So the higher the GDP, the better off y'all are. So it's important that our GDP, our real GDP, is increasing with time rather than decreasing with time. All right, let's take a look at some of the limitations of the GDP. The first is going to be non-market activities. What we mean by non-market activities is things that might not be written down, for instance, on a tax return. So I'm sure a lot of you guys have babysat, right? But you're not filing your cash money you're getting from babysitting on your tax returns. So that's money that's not being factored into the GDP. So that would be considered a non-market activity. Um, Another limitation is the underground economy, also known as the black market. Walter White, for instance, Breaking Bad, was not going to go around declaring the amount of money he made by selling meth. So people are spending money in the black market and they're spending a large sum of money, but that's not being factored into our GDP. Our GDP did increase this past year because marijuana was legalized. So beforehand, marijuana was still being grown, it was still being sold, it was still being purchased. However, it wasn't legal, so people were not reporting that activity and therefore it could not be factored into the GDP. The last limitation of the GDP is going to be quality of life. So the GDP can't measure this, right? They can't measure the quality of clean air or water or healthcare system. So just because a nation has a high GDP, it doesn't necessarily mean that people are living well. It doesn't always equate. So those are just some limitations of the GDP. So let's look at influences on the GDP. So influences, what can help dictate the GDP? That's going to be our aggregate supply and aggregate demand. They're going to control or they're going to influence our GDP. So we've talked a lot in economics about supply and demand, right? And the law of supply and the law of demand. I don't know that y'all remember exactly what the law of supply says, so I'll refresh your memory. I know it's been a while, but the law of supply says that the more something costs, essentially, then the more of that product are going to be supplied. So the higher the price, the higher the quantity of supplied. The reason that is because producers are incentivized by making money. So if they see that at a market level, the price of I don't know, water bottles is going up, like hydro flasks, they're going to create more hydro flasks because they're incentivized to make more money. So what aggregate supply and aggregate demand, what those are, it's going to be the total amount of goods and services in the economy available to sell or available to be purchased across all price levels. Okay. Um, Now, all price levels here is the crucial point. This is especially applicable right now because demand, for instance, and supply, those are both down across all levels, right? It doesn't matter what price point a baseball bat is selling at, the supply of baseball bats all around is down because people aren't demanding baseball bats right now during this pandemic. Okay. So aggregate supply and aggregate demand are going to influence the GDP. This kind of last uh, concept that we're going to get into today is business cycles. All right, so we've probably all heard of a business cycle, but we have not yet, as a class, taken a look at what a business cycle is. So, a business cycle consists of four phases, and every economy in the world has a business cycle. Okay, the first phase of a business cycle is expansion. The second phase is a peak. The third phase is contraction. And the last phase is a trough. Okay, so those are our four phases of the business cycle. You guys had your Great Recession email assignments that were recently due. So let's just kind of start there and take a look at that. So the Great Recession occurred, we know, in 2008, and that's because there was a trough in the economy. Um, Now, the Great Recession lasted a little while, but after a bit, probably starting in about 2012, so 4 years later, the economy started to expand again. So there was a long period of expansion from about 2012 until about 2017, where the economy just kept expanding. It kept growing, okay, which was great, right? It grew and it grew and it grew and it grew. And then in February of 2020, so just a couple months ago, it reached its peak, right? The stock market was at a high, the economy peaked, and then what happened? COVID hit, right? And there was a pandemic. So now there's a contraction, and that's the phase that we are or were just in, where there was a steady decline ever since February, right? Unemployment is raising as people are losing their jobs, the stock market is dropping, our economy is contracting into another recession. So that's a prime example of the business cycle in action right now. But why does this happen? So why does this cycle keep going, right? We know, like, you're probably like, Miss Harvey, well, what the heck? It's not like we always have a uh, pandemic on our hands. Correct, right? We don't. However, the business cycle is going to continue um, cycling through. So, what keeps a business cycle going? Why does this keep occurring? So, there are a few different reasons. The first is business investment. So, there might be a lack of people investing in businesses because we know businesses, they're either going to thrive or they're going to fail, right? So, if we take a look, let's remember the founder, right? We know that McDonald's as a business, it thrived, whereas Dick and Mac, they're business, it failed. Okay, so business investment or lack thereof, that might keep an economy in a recessive state. Another thing that's going to keep a business cycle going is interest rates and credit. So what the central bank is actually going to do is they might intentionally raise interest rates if they think our economy is growing too rapidly. Okay, guys, they have to do this. They have to every once in a while go in there and increase interest rates so that they can slow down the economy. Now, why would they want to do that? They're going to want to do that because otherwise prices are just going to escalate and they're going to get too high, right? You are then going to find yourself paying $20 for a gallon of gas or for a pack of gum. So what they're going to do is they're going to implement higher interest rates in order to kind of slow down economic growth. Another thing that keeps a business cycle going is consumer expectations. We've talked about consumer expectations in the past, and it's applicable here in the business cycle as well. Um, a recent example of this is President Trump. He recently cut taxes last year. And when he cut taxes, a lot of people decided that they were going to buy a lot more and spend a lot more because they knew that they had more money to be able to do that. They expected bigger tax cuts, bigger tax breaks, and so they then put more money into our economy. Consumer expectations are affecting the business cycle right now with this pandemic. People right now are thinking, what if I lose my job? What if, okay, I did lose my job, but I have unemployment benefits, but how long until that runs out? So people are panicking right now. And what happens when people panic is they're going to hold on to their money, right? They're not spending their money. And that is going to lead, that has led us into the beginning of a recession. The last factor that kind of keeps a business cycle going is going to be external shocks to the economy. Examples of this are war, droughts, natural disasters, etc. Okay, let's take a look at indicators for change. So, how do we know we're heading into a contractionary period? How do we know that the economy is going to slow down? Or how do we know that the economy is going to start to expand again? How do we know it's going to reach a peak soon? There are a few indicators for this. The first is the stock market. So I know earlier I had mentioned that stocks and purchases in the stock market are not included in the GDP, which is correct. However, the stock market can still indicate what's going to happen to our economy. Okay. So people, what they do when they have money is they're going to be more inclined to invest in companies, invest in the stock markets, purchase shares of stocks, right? Because they have the money to do that. However, when people don't have the money to do that, they are not going to be purchasing shares of stocks, right? They are going to be holding on to their money or they're going to be selling their shares and stocks. One of the first things people are going to do when they don't have money is going to be to stop investing. So if we see that the stock market is turning sharply down, we can see that we're heading into a contractionary period, that the economy is slowing down. So the stock market is a very big indicator of what's going on in the United States economy. Another factor is interest rates increasing. We just talked about this, but this is a forced indicator, right? If the central bank decides they're going to increase interest rates, then we know that there's going to be more of a slowdown in our economy. This last one is really important, and this is manufacturers, excuse me, reducing new orders of capital goods, so new orders of products. So let's take a house as an example. If nobody is purchasing homes, or if nobody is building a house, then what else aren't they purchasing? No raw materials are needed, right? No building equipment's needed. No trucks, and tractors, etc., are needed. Um, Plumbers, they're not needed, right? Roofers, they're not needed. There's this ripple down effect. So when none of those people are needed, they're getting laid off, right? Because they don't have a job. And then what happens to real estate companies and all of the people that real estate companies employ? The people who work for them, right? They're all getting laid off as well because they're no longer needed. And so when manufacturers reduce new orders of capital goods, and this is an indicator that our business cycle is headed into the contractionary period. Okay, let's see here. Let me hold on, check my notes real fast. Okay, economic growth. So how do we measure economic growth, right? We just talked about looking at the contractionary period, but how do we look at economic growth? How do we measure it? How do we know that we are on track towards expansion and peaks in the market, in our economy? One way to measure this is the percentage change of the real GDP over time. We talked about this at the beginning, but how much has our GDP, our real GDP, increased, for instance, since the year 2000? It has gone up since the year 2000, just not as much as if you would look at the nominal figures, okay? So the first thing is the percentage change of real GDP over time. Something else we're going to look at is the real GDP per capita. This is going to be what your GDP is. So, for instance, what the United States GDP is divided by the number of people that are living in your country. That can give you an idea as to what economic growth looks like. Saving and investing, foreign trade, how much we're importing and exporting. But this last one I kind of want to harp on, and that's technological progress. Technological progress, guys, is going to be the biggest indicator, the biggest way to measure economic growth, okay? This is going to be the biggest determinant because with technological progress comes new innovations, comes new industries, new markets, new job opportunities, etc. So what are some then causes of technological progress? How can we ensure that technological progress is continuing? Scientific research, innovation, the scale of the market, education, experience. You guys are probably going to be in school for a lot longer than your grandparents, than your parents, than most of your teachers, right? Because you're continuing to learn and continuing to adapt to these new technologies. You guys live, we all live in this incredible age of technological growth. I remember when I was in high school and I said, I have no idea what I want to do with my life. I have no idea what I want to be when I grow up. And someone had said to me, one day when you get a job, it's going to be one that doesn't even exist yet. And I thought, how is that even possible? Like, that's just seemed out of the realm of possibility. And my first job outside of college after I graduated was actually in digital marketing as a social media manager. And so that job certainly did not exist when I was in high school. There was nobody creating Instagram ads, Facebook ads, marketing campaigns on LinkedIn, right? That didn't exist. So there are going to be more and more industries, more and more jobs coming available to you guys that we probably can't even fathom right now. Okay, so that's where we'll go ahead and end it for this lecture. Thank you guys so much for bearing with me and sticking through that. What I want you guys to do for the duration of this class period is to do a little write-up for me. about about 2 paragraphs. I don't want this just to be a couple sentences. I really do want you guys to put some thought into this. A couple of paragraphs relevant to what we're currently experiencing today. So I'm going to go ahead and post the prompt for you guys. But what you're going to be answering is how can we, once this pandemic is through, once this pandemic is over, how can we improve our GDP? What can our banks do? What can our government do? Etc. to get our economy back on track, out of this trough, create new jobs, etc. This doesn't have to be a super detailed plan about getting our economy back on track, right? None of us are economists here. I just want you guys to think creatively and to come up with a couple ideas of how we as a nation are going to be able to do that once this pandemic is over. So go ahead, work on that for the rest of the class. Prompt is posted for you guys. PowerPoint is posted also. I think I end like every video telling you I miss you, but I really, really do. And I hope you're doing well. And we will touch base soon. All right, thanks, guys.